Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 Podcast, a weekly podcast about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas, where we talk about all the important topics, even the ones people are afraid to touch. And this episode, it feels like a retro throwback episode when we were in the middle of the mayoral race, and it was juicy. I'm excited for this episode. And on the other hand, I'm not sure. How you feeling over there?
I don't know, a little trepidation. I mean, I know we say we talk about politics, and I've been in politics, so I feel like that should be a comfortable space for me. But I think the edgy side of the pod, where people expect us to, be more edgy, and I'm not Jimmy. But so we miss Jimmy in times like this. I think he would be great to chime in on some of this stuff.
Yeah, we need to catch up with Jimmy. I wonder where he's at these days.
I think we should find
if
out.
He's really loving his life, doing what he's doing, and
he still responds to our text message thread about articles and things. But it would have been nice to get his input on some of this stuff.
And he had some hot takes on, so obviously the big story is going to be about Kate Granger not taking her seat again. And now what are all the possibilities for such an important, powerful seat, not just for Fort Worth, but for the country? And so we're going to dive into that as our big story. But if you're a regular here, you know that we do 3 short stories. Then we hit the big story. I know some of our reviews on our Apple podcasts and stuff is like, they have a title and then they don't talk about the title. And I was like, well, because they don't wait until
the whole thing. They don't listen to the whole thing and they make a comment.
Yeah.
Oh, that's like people who don't read the comments and then make a comment. And things are answered in the comments. That drives me crazy. That's, that harkens back to my whole thing of wanting to be completely informed and educated about the things that I speak on, which causes me a lot of stress, but I'll do my best.
So we're going to hit our 3 short stories and then going to hit that big story and do our wins and losses. So our first short story is Fort Worth considers a $3.5 million settlement with the family of a Tatiana Jefferson. Fort Worth could settle one of 2 lawsuits brought by members of a Tatiana Jefferson's family in the wake of her October 29th shooting death by former Fort Worth police officer Aaron Dean. As we know, Dean shot a Tatiana Jefferson through a window. Her nephew was there, and really her nephew Zion Carr. This settlement is for him, and what we're going to see here is the $3.5 million will be put into a trust for Zion Carr. He will be able to use it for education, and if not, there will be he can get it in a large sum. But at the end of the day, the real win here is that our mayor, Maddie Parker, said, I believe this settlement is the right thing to do, and I hope this can bring a degree of reconciliation and healing for the Tatiana Jefferson family. And so I think that was also a win. And we're talking about this could go to vote, possibly.
As early as November 14th.
Yeah, so what, you weren't in office in 2019, or were you?
No, I was.
Okay, so I don't think we actually have had this conversation of how was going through this Tatiana Jefferson situation as a council person.
It was traumatic.
Yeah.
Not just as a city and to individuals, but mostly to the family. So being someone who represented the city, it was a challenging position to be in. And I wanted to honor the family and the folks who were more directly impacted. So I think the way that I handled it at the time was to attend gatherings where people were gathering in support of Tatiana and her family, but not insert myself into that situation because, I didn't ever feel that it was about me.
Yeah.
But this, I feel, as the mayor stated, and I think also Councilmember Chris Nettles, that this is the right thing to do, and not dragging them through a court, a situation and a lawsuit, but actually settling and providing this support for her son.
Yeah, and we're recording on Friday, so I can imagine that more possibly could be developed. So, because it says one of the 2 settlements, so I don't know what that would then play to the other case, I guess, out there, and if there would have to be some type of agreement of letting that one go, and I don't know what the capacity of that one's about. It was a much of an intro breaking story to the whole thing, But all in all, we're starting with a win with our first short story pod, and that is rare to start with a win.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. There's been a lot of loss and tragedy in that family, even beyond Tatiana herself. Her sister has passed away, and her mother has passed away. It's been a tragic situation all the way around, and I hope that they can find some peace for her family from this.
100%. Well, let's go ahead and now move into short story number 2, which really we felt like we wanted to bring up because we had Twyla Masterson on last week with Leadership ISD to talk about education and getting involved in our school districts.
This highlights an area where people could definitely get involved.
Yeah, when she talked about reading with some first graders, that was pretty spot on. So do you want to bring us in with this story?
Right. This article is a Fort Worth Report article titled "Black Students in Fort Worth ISD Still Struggle to Read at Grade Level." And the very first couple of paragraphs speak to an individual student who started off with a great interest in historical figures that look like herself, an African-American entrepreneur, and that she had a great desire to read. And this, I love kids that read and library kids, and I just felt that was really wonderful. But she started to kind of run into situations where she wasn't able to find the books necessarily that reflect herself, and so that kind of put a damper on her desires to read. And then testing caused some issues as well. And then I guess the way they've taught reading in the past, where they read off of memory with pictures and that sort of thing. And I think the highlight in this article talking about how it's important to base the way that we read on, the science of reading, which is phonics and sounding things out so that you are actually learning to read and not just using the pictures to kind of trigger what it is that you think the sentence says. There's a whole podcast on that as well that I listened to recently that just talked about that shift that happened. But they're pointing out that Black students across all levels at Fort Worth ISD score lower than any other demographics in the 2023 State of Texas Assessments of Academic Readiness Testing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big kicker to me of the story, and it's not. I mean, this story was about the Black students, but the overall Fort Worth ISD lack of success when you compare it to other districts at their size, but then when you can even get to the demographics of other cities with similar demographics, but they're able to do it. Fort Worth ISD is one of the largest districts in Texas, and their third grade reading scores compared to other big cities is pretty poor. In 2023, 32% of third graders in Fort Worth ISD met grade level on the state reading test. And so comparing that to 47% Dallas, comparing that to Houston ISD with 46%, Texas as a whole at 50%, Northside ISD 48%. So it's not just like we're lower, we're 12 percentage points, 14 percentage points lower than Dallas ISD.
And I think some of the things that they've pointed to in the past that might be causing this are things that those other districts have struggled with as well. So there's got to be something besides those things. So, they're looking at other districts that have similar demographics, went through COVID, all of the things. So why is it that in Fort Worth they're still having this struggle? And, some of the things to me are some of the programs that Fort Worth ISD has put in place that would have been beneficial to these students and help them be more successful have been targeted in the district by folks that have been making complaints to the school district about programs. So programs of excellence and equity has been targeted. There's been people talking about not wanting to have books that feature Black and Latinx characters. Those have been targeted. There's been complaints about redistricting that would have basically desegregated some schools, which, desegregation happened a long time ago. But when you look at some schools today, there's still that segregation.
I'm looking at this. So we're going to have the stories in the show notes, but a hypothesis you just I got a lightning strike about is Fort Worth ISD is the only ISD on this list that they show where the political power control of the city doesn't align with the school district's political values. Dallas ISD and Dallas County are equally Democratic. Houston ISD and Houston is equally Democratic. But then if you go to even the Frisco ISDs or the Fort Bends and places that are less, maybe more Republican, they're doing still really, really well as well. Fort Worth ISD is the largest school district that is not like, since it represents the loop of Fort Worth, most of it, and it's, high, I'd say just high Democrat or high progressive or liberal groups of people involved in those spaces, we're probably the biggest one who have to go to now a Republican city, but then also a conservative county. Fort Worth ISD is the only district that is also facing probably the most disalignment perspectives of politics and how things should be ran compared to the other district.
Yeah, that's not something the article touches on, but that's a hot take that you kind of popped up for you in describing what is happening with those districts and Fort Worth ISD. I think that basically what this hits home and what people need to continuously be looking at is that Black students are getting lost. And what isn't made a connection here is that that's partially because, like I said before, every single thing that Fort Worth ISD has tried to do to help that specific population has been targeted. And so I think we need to take a look at that and make sure that the programs that can help are not being taken away.
Yeah. Well, that is short story number 2. If you're going to do anything in the new year and create little resolution goals, maybe, help a student in your local city, tutor them and read with them and maybe do that. Twyla told us it's 1 hour a week.
And as Destiny is the child that had talked about her reading experience that is shared by many Fort Worth ISD kids, you need to talk to them and believe that the district needs to focus more on culture and race in their literacy so that Black students don't feel that they can't relate to the material that's being covered.
All right, so we're going to move to short story number 3. I sent this to you because I thought you would have already read it because it's about parks and, making the quality of our lives better and planning. And I'm like, all right, this is an Zeta. I'm giving you an alley-oop. So can you bring us into short story number 3 before we get into the big story? And we're going to be talking about, the juicy stuff of that big story. And I have a lot of opinions and takes on that. So I'm excited to get there. But this is an important story, and I also have opinions on this as an East Side resident.
All right. So Fort Worth Report again. There is a new $140 million Gateway Park plan with $8 million to spend now. What comes first? So I had not read the article when you sent it to me, but I was aware of many of the community meetings that were being held. I think they had 3 different community meetings, if not more, spread across the city because while this is a very large park on the east side, it is considered like a regional park. And so they want input from folks all over the city as to what goes into this plan. So there were multiple meetings across the city. I know that Jeanette Martinez shared this on her social media to encourage folks to come and be heard about what they'd like to see going in here. But the new plan for Fort Worth's largest park, which has been called like our Central Park, is nearly $140 million in improvements. And I got really excited and thought they had $140 million, but then we go on to find out that they have 8 at the moment. But that the draft plan would expand the park across Beach Street, improve road access, add community event space, along with new sports fields and trails. And they've hired Kimley Horn locally here to produce the plan. And recent Park and Recreational Advisory Board is going to chime in on that as well. But like we said, the price tag is $140 million, and the Parks Department currently only has $8 million in the 2022 bond. The city does bonds every 4 years, so we're coming up on another bond soon, but it won't be $140 million for one park. I can guarantee you that. And so there's some quotes in here with some local folks that follow along with these things. Rick Herring, who's a neighborhood association leader, indicated that he was surprised at the estimated cost and understands that it's not going to happen in just one bond election. But one opinion for the first project is to establish parkland west of Beach Street that would include new soccer fields, bathrooms, amphitheater in the Oxbow area, and the far northeast corner of the park, which would also be a good place to start work. A new playground, improved park entrances, new trails are all possibilities there. I think somebody's talking about a dog park. There's disc golf. That's
Dog
the
park
other
expansion.
thing. There, that's another thing. I think that an opportunity to share with people what already exists there, because I think a lot of people are not aware of what parks are around. We talk about how important it is to have neighborhood parks that people can walk to within 10 minutes from their home, but we have a lot of great assets as far as parks existing in the city. I think this one clearly needs some more amenities to make it fully, delivering what it could with the size that it is. But it's good to let people know, because I'm sure there's many people in our city that have never been to Gateway Park.
Yeah, if you just gave the budget that we have spent on studying Panther Island, I mean, we would have a lot more bang for our buck at Gateway Park right now. Now, I'm not saying that Panther Island is not going to be a cool thing, but we're neglecting a park that is. I drive by it all the time, and there's people playing soccer. There's baseball. There's mountain biking. There's a very large dog park. And so there's a lot of opportunity, and what's cool about it, and there's so much like open land right there to even like create some real livable spaces over there where people can have skyline views, kind of like what condos they build over by Topgolf. I don't say that's what we should do, but like
there's
just
so
a lot
many
of
places
opportunity
around Fort Worth where you have amazing skyline views. I think people don't get out of their bubble.
Yeah.
When I was serving on the zoning commission and I was the mayor's appointee, I would go around to zoning cases all over the city, and I was absolutely surprised at the multitude of places that from the east side, the north side, all over the place where you can see downtown Fort Worth. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. The article goes into the fact that this is looking at doing a new master plan for the park. They haven't done one. I think the first master plan for the city was in 2009 and helped guide Fort Worth's investments in park over 10 years. And even if they don't have an idea of where the funding is going to come from, it's really important to have these plans on the books, because funding can arise from different sources, not totally expected. Like there can be federal dollars, there can be grants from nature conservancies, all kinds of things could be available. And if you have a plan in place, then you're ready to take advantage of those when they arise. So just because you don't have the funds to do everything right away, it's still important to do these plans. I know sometimes people balk at the cost of the plans, but I think that they lead to better utilizing funds in the future to actually implement the plans.
Yeah. Well, that is our short story number 3, Gateway Park having a $140 million plan. And there could be a lot of ways to uplift the East Side community and give it some value by really developing one of the sleepiest assets that we have in the city. Now we're going to move to the big story. So we are lucky that this came out on Friday. Like, it would have been really poopy to have done a episode on Friday and all of this news about Granger stepping aside would have came out, and I'm like, oh man, now we feel like we are not giving you something that's
timely.
Yes. And so we're recording on Friday because I am leaving to Las Vegas tomorrow, and so we're going to just talk about this. There's a lot I want to say here, just from looking at it from a Fort Worth perspective and just the position itself. But let's go ahead and read this Fort Worth article.
So I think the first article that popped up was a Fort Worth Report article that didn't have a confirmation of what Congressman Granger was going to be doing, but indicated that she may not be running again for Congress. And it had some information from 5 folks that were close but remained anonymous, and so we weren't sure, but that was kind of the tip-off that this news might be coming, indicated that she would announce. But then that's been updated, so.
And for like newer Fort Worthians like myself, right? Like I came in 2017. I know a lot of like new people who are like, oh, 2015 or this and that. Like I think the really power is like she's the highest ranking Fort Worth Republican. She is super influential in history in the sense of being a female-led, politician in her time. I mean, only 5 people have had this seat since 1919, and she's really like not just locally successful as as mayor, and but really like to being part of ahead of the federal level too, and all the things she has done for Lockheed Martin and all those.
As a not so new resident of Fort Worth, I remember when Kay Granger served on the zoning commission and was the mayor of Fort Worth.
Wow.
So they go back to talking about how her political career began in Fort Worth on the zoning commission, and then she was elected to the city council, and she became the first woman to serve the city council, the city as mayor in 1991. So I guess I wasn't here when she was on the zoning commission because I moved here in 1990, and she was the mayor in 91. So. But definitely, one thing I pointed out to you, and we were talking about the fact that the seat that she's in now is a partisan seat, and she is a Republican. And so we've been talking about, who might run for this seat and all of that. But for me, I remember Kay Granger as our mayor. And when she first ran for Congress and ran as a Republican, it was a surprise to me. I had seen her as our mayor, and she was the mayor for the city of Fort Worth. And I would definitely say that back in the early 90s, those seats were less partisan. I think local government tries to hang on to that less partisanship space, but I think it's becoming harder and harder. But back then, I literally had no idea that she was a Republican. And I think I've heard stories that she might have been courted by both Republicans and Democrats to run for that congressional seat back in the day.
Wow.
So I would say that not just I was unfamiliar with what her politics were back then.
And and one of the things she also did is led the House Appropriations Committee, which is extremely powerful when it comes to federal dollars. There's no Panther Island without this kind of efforts, it feels like. So when you bring up that she didn't bring politics into the city, it feels like that could be a good thing back then. I think people still kind of try to live that today, even though it's hard to. But she also kind of still, even to her final step, of being a leader in the seat that she was in, she didn't vote for Jim Jordan in that whole situation. She's one of the Republicans who sat out on voting for Jim Jordan, which I think is a big move for the country as well. So I miss this kind of Republican. This is to me what I believe what Fort Worth needs is people to learn from Kay Granger that, man, this like moderate, centered, thoughtful Republican,
willing to work with everyone.
Yes, is like the thing we're missing. So, I think like that's to me like what her legacy could be for us is just to like remember that used to exist and like we don't have to live on the fringes. But let's also talk about. Go ahead.
Well, the second article that actually came out that officially had her statement was a Star-Telegram article. So we want to make sure that we give them credit for the longtime Fort Worth Republican Kay Granger will not seek reelection to the U.S. House. And so that article came out shortly after the one that the Fort Worth Report had with the speculation that she might not run. Many of the same facts are shared in that article, but it has her actual statement as she announced her decision to not seek reelection. She's encouraged by the next generation of leaders in her district, and it's time for the next generation to step up and take the mantle to be a strong and fierce representative of the people. So she won't be running, but she plans to serve out the remainder of her term. And I think there was actually some discussion about some of the things that she wants to try to accomplish in the last part of her term as well.
And we also saw a lot of different people come out and celebrate her success, from the mayor,
Representative Roger Williams.
Pro Jr. Several people came out and kind of talked highly about her stuff, right? I think I know in the 817 pod, her one kind of chink in her armor and her legacy was the nepotism of Panther Island. But I don't know how much that's her fault rather than just her kids. I don't know. I just know, like, you're so big and busy. I just don't want to say like it was all intentional, but
I think that was a very large story that kind of overpowered a lot of things. And I don't necessarily think that was super helpful.
Yeah. So, but I know that was a big part of when we were starting the 817 podcast going on. But
Before I was here.
yes. But now,
This article also started, and I'm sorry, I'm talking over a
No,
little
go ahead.
bit, but
Let it
this
run.
article started to speculate a little bit about who might be interested in running for her seat. And a few people were, reached out to ask, and most of them in deference to the announcement that had just been made and made statements about how, thankful and grateful they were for her time of service and that this conversation was for another day. But that day came very quickly because then we were followed up. So in that first article, there's a couple of speculations as to the fact that there's already somebody who's filed to run against her. So that person is
John O'Shea.
Going to be running. And then...
Correct, John O'Shea?
Yes, that is
a
correct.
Republican who has the support of Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. So already immediate red flags. He announced in January.
And then there was some speculation as to whether Craig Goldman might run.
Which is now
our
official.
State representative. And yes, we got an article as we were sitting here preparing for this podcast today saying that he has announced that. So that's what I mean by that day passed, and today now people are actually making official statements that they are.
Yeah, Goldman announced his campaign for Texas 12th District Friday morning. His decision to run for U.S. House creates an open race for his seat in Texas Ledge, which this article then leads to say that Dr. Brian Byrd is considering that seat and has told Fort Worth Report that he is considering it and would give us an announcement in a few weeks. So, okay, now there was more, on the list, right? Everyone immediately went to Betsy was, always kind of waiting for this, but no one brought up Betsy.
None of the articles.
None
I
of
was
them.
really surprised by that. I thought that there might at least be an inquiry and maybe a response that she's going to do what she had said she was going to do and concentrate on family and grandkids, but there was not even a mention of in a speculative way. So that seems interesting to me. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And then another one clearly was then if it was not Betsy, it was like, oh, Mayor Maddie Parker, but then her comms team had told the Fort Worth Report that she's staying put, which I'm excited. I want to continue the list before we start assessing. Who else is throwing their name in the ring? State Rep Nate Scatzline, a Fort Worth Republican who said people have reached out to him about running but remains focused on the special legislative session. Called for an American First candidate who has the fortitude to stand up to the swamp, !
He also did say anything is possible in the future, so not closing the door.
And Tim O'Hare also said no. But Tim O'Hare, commissioner colleague, Manny Ramirez, seems to be, he's very indicating that he is considering this DC work as the county work is to roads, trash, water for him.
Well, I think his comment was that he was very locally focused, which would mean that he was planning to continue to be locally focused. But he hasn't been locally focused for very long because he just got elected not very long ago. So that seems very stair-steppy to me. Whenever I see people run for office and then run for another office and then run for another office, even if they've won or lost, I'm just like, what is it that you're really interested in doing, and who is it that you're really interested in serving? Or are you just interested in being elected? So
yeah, he's probably one of the most successful to parlay a Fort Worth Police President Association position to
other stuff.
He's parlayed it pretty far. Okay, I think those are everyone that like the journalists and the media has kind of thrown out. We also were kind of talking like some people saying what would be a Democrat option, right? This is obviously heavy Republican. This is going to be a very expensive race. It's going to be $1 million over. I think that's actually under. I think it's going to be like,
the mayor's race hit $1 million, so I can't.
I can see this hitting over too.
Yeah.
And
they've discussed some of these folks who already have quite a lot of money in there.
Well, yeah, the one guy said I was the reason why Granger stepped out because he has like a 3/4 $750,000.
No, that's
not the same guy.
That's Goldman.
Goldman.
Yeah, the person who said that he said he has a grassroots campaign and that he was the reason that Kay chose not to run again. I think that was just posturing.
And that was O'Shea.
That was O'Shea.
Gotcha.
I haven't seen his campaign reports, but I don't think he has anywhere near what Craig Goldman has.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so now we're sitting back. I bet a lot of you, if you're really into this kind of stuff, like super politics stuff, you've probably assessed it and thought what could be options.
James Riddlesberger, who's a TCU professor, described the open race for the 12th Congressional District as a rare moment. Since 1919, only 5 people have represented the district, 3 of whom have been influential. It's going to be a very competitive race, even though we don't know who those candidates will be, Riddlesberger said. And I think there was a paragraph in his discussion
Is the last paragraph of the article where he talks about...
There is no question that there will probably be a dozen Republicans and maybe 4 or 5 Democrats who have been dreaming of a day when the 12th District of Texas opens up, and that they might have the wherewithal to run to replace her, Riddlesberger said.
When you look at a Democratic candidate hasn't yet emerged, Trey Hunt ran for the seat most recently in 2022's general election, losing with 36% of the votes against Granger. So yeah, let's and then here's where Riddlesberger says, and while the Republican is more likely to win than not, the district is one where a strong Democrat candidate could be competitive, said Jim Riddlesberger, a TCU political science professor. So we're now out of reporting, analyzing here. Some names that I wish were kind of on here to consider would be, from a Democrat side, is I feel like people who've beefed up their brands over the last couple of years that I think could hold some weight, like a Nicole Collier. I think she would be phenomenal. I don't know what Ramon Romero's energy is, but I thought he would be a great...
I was just surprised there wasn't more speculation on who some of these people might be. And that might just be that people are scrambling to try to find, but you have come up with 2 names that I think are potential ones that somebody should be considering, or maybe they should be considering.
Yeah, especially because if 3 of the 5 people were, quote unquote, what do you say, influential, which I don't even know how we define that. He just said 3 of the 5 were influential. I feel bad for the other 2 because it meant they were just like basic. But if you need an influential Democrat, then you're going to need a name. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out who that could be.
Is like November 11th to December 11th. So people are not having a long time to make this decision.
My overall kind of take here is that all these Texas Republican guys, so like I love Brian, I don't love it, but like if Dr. Brian Byrd's going to run for Goldman's seat, like that's fine because I don't think he can do a lot of damage in Texas. They all are just like him, so he just is going to rinse him. He's just going to add to the entourage. And I also think all these Texas Republican kind of energy, Ken Paxton supporters, they're not going to make a lot of noise in Kay Granger's seat because it's not Texas anymore. You're now at the federal level, and that's what made Kay Granger so good at it, is that she knew how to navigate and work with people and still hold dignity and respect from her Republican Party and have, friends on the other side. And none of these people who is like, if these people were running for local office, I'd be freaking out a lot more. But please go have at it. Take your weird Texas attitude and take it over there. Like, I'm not worried about it. But
it'll be diluted by folks that don't agree with them at the federal level.
So I'm not too worried about all these names. I would say where I was disappointed is that currently the Parker camp is not interested. If anyone in the mayor's office listens to this pod, my thesis to her running is probably also why I started this podcast with Jimmy. And it was, we have to understand that Fort Worth today is a purple city. And as a purple city, we're the largest purple city. And when I say purple city, we're the closest toss up between Republican Democrats, right? It's 60-40, 50-50, depending on what's running when you look at races. And I think that's something we should be prideful of, that all the other large cities are hyper blue cities. And a lot of other Texas is extremely red, but we are purple. And I think that's something to be proud of. and not my disappointment, but I see the potential of a Republican mayor in Fort Worth could be more appropriate in saying we are a purple city and I'm going to represent the whole. But unfortunately, I feel like she's been pressured by the Fort Worth way, which I define the Fort Worth way as people who can't let go that Fort Worth is no longer red, but they want to keep it red. And so for me, I feel like this would have been a great Parker play because she's really good at what I think this role kind of takes. And that is being moderate, being smart, and getting a lot of
being willing
old
to
people
work
to
with
like
all
you.
the sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. I mean, I haven't talked to her, so I don't know what her decision-making process is. And again, this hasn't come from her. It's just come from spokespeople from her office. I think part of it, and this is just observation as someone who served and went through some grueling campaigns, one of them in a mayor's race with Maddie. I think that it's not an easy thing to do right now. And if you have to make huge personal sacrifices to serve. And if you're serving for the right reasons and willing to listen to everyone and try to work together and collaborate, I think that's even more challenging in these times. And the scary thing about that is that it means that the people who might do a better job because they're willing to do those things and they're serving for those reasons and that's what they're there to do are becoming less interested in making those personal sacrifices because they either feel like they can't make that difference that they would like to make, or they just feel like the beating that will ensue, not actual physical beating, but that what they have to take on is just too much.
And that's why I also think like it would be more compelling because the parts of I feel like that you wouldn't enjoy of a mayor, you don't have to handle in something like this position.
In
like
that office,
you get to be much more out of the spotlight.
That whole thing, you run into your local elected officials at the grocery store and they constantly want to talk to you about all of the things. The thing that made it staycations no longer fun for my husband because every time we went somewhere, we would run into people.
And so I just honestly believe she would be the best of those candidates because I also believe she's the most moderate and she understands the constituents that she's at. But again, she's not a terrible mayor either. So that was interesting. What other, I guess, I think that's pretty much my analysis on it.
I think there's more news to come. It's they've said there's going to be other candidates. The whole paragraph where Riddlesberger indicated that it could be a competitive seat for the right Democrat. You know, that's something people were calling me. And my husband's like, no. I was like, I don't want to go any further away from where my children are. That's the opposite side of the country.
It's we had not talked Anzeta strategy here.
There's no strategy for Anzeta. But you did ask me before we started recording, like what did the reasons why I ran for office and what did I see as the strengths that I brought, and whether or not being like a city planner and being in elected office was beneficial. And, I always, when people would ask me about offices at the state level or even the county level, I felt like, well, cities are my thing because I'm a city planner. But there's a lot of decisions that go on at the county level for sure, and the state level even more so now that impact cities and local. And now even, the federal does too. So I think there's no educational requirement to run for elected office. Mm-hmm. You can be anybody. You don't have to be, I guess a lot of lawyers run for office, but you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be any of those things. And I think that bringing the expertise from various aspects of life is important. And that we didn't even touch on the fact that Representative Granger or Congresswoman Granger has served for 30 years. Yeah. I think some of that, and some of our county representatives served for 30 plus years. And I always saw that as a little bit problematic. Yeah. I don't like people jumping and running for one office and then another office and another office in super short order, because I think that reflects just not really having an interest in what it is that each of those offices is there to do. Mm-hmm. But I also have a problem with people who serve for 30 years, because I think that often jumps over generations of leaders that could have served and doesn't reflect the community necessarily across all of that time as demographic changes occur and things change. But then some of those institutions reward longevity. And so you might not ever get to, the rankings that our Congresswoman has gotten to, having not been there for the 30 years. Yeah. So it's just frustrating. There's not like a cut and dried answer.
Yeah, yeah. And this is why Proposition 13 on the ballot of voting in Texas, we're both no's on number 13, because it's raising the age
of retirement for judges.
From 74 to 79 or 75 to 79? Yeah, something like that. Because I agree. And that's honestly like what's simply killing like the excitement for, like, one thing that's killing excitement for America is that you got 2 80-year-olds running for president. Like, that's just it. It's like, why do you not like Joe Biden? He's old and can't remember things. It's like, okay, I can't disagree with there possibly, but that's all you got, like that. But that's it. And then people are uninterested, and it's like, but anyways, I guess all my other speculations would be around clearly and here's why, like, I guess I'm happy, I as much as I give Mayor Parker a hard time, it's because I believe I see her influence that she can have in bringing a sanity and middle ground back to, what you talk about, Kay Granger, back then as your mayor, and you didn't know. That's only possible again if centrist, moderate Republicans stop, telling their right side, hey, you're no longer bullying our party. We know our constituents. We're common sense. And so, that's why I'm okay with her here, because if she leaves, that means the next up was Brian Byrd or Steve Panate, and I don't, that. So I don't know what, so she kind of like is saving grace, but we all know that, could be if she lost, left her seat, you got Michael Crane, which I think could play the protection role of trying to keep Fort Worth Republicans more centered. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, that's going to be our last episode when they do file, because I'll be gone for a month. So that'll be a hot one.
But it's, I didn't even think about all of the, the dominoes that fall once somebody who's already in some seat announces they're running for another one. So that whole with Craig Goldman saying he's running, opening up his seat, and people who I haven't heard much from in quite some time are saying, oh yeah, I'm considering running for that seat.
And I don't know much about Craig Goldman. What's your
he's my representative.
There? Okay. And
he's been very accessible to me. I when I reach out to him, that probably has something to do with being in the same neighborhood and having been in an elected office. So I think that he has moved up in the ranks at the state level. He had quite a strong role this go round with being kind of the right hand of the speaker. And so, it's funny because I remember, and he may not remember, when he very first ran back in 2012, 2013 timeframe, his mother worked out at the same place that I worked out at. And she was like, my son is running for office. Yeah. So I've been aware of Craig Goldman for quite some time.
And I know we focus on Tarrant County and Fort Worth, but it seems like there's this, like, Goldman is more a Dade feeling kind of Republican supporter. And then you have like this other guy who O'Shea, who's like a Ken Paxton supporter. So you're already kind of seeing the fight happening in the state level. And I feel like one of my biggest losses for Fort Worth is that there's no one really fighting for that locally, especially against our county today. But yeah, I mean, like, it seems like Goldman's on the camp of common sense Republican who, just wants to do right for all people.
Some of the things that I was down in Austin not campaigning, but trying to get addressed were, my Safe Streets initiatives. And he was on the transportation committee and, would always listen to what I was having to say. So I think of him as one of the people who are willing to hear both sides before making a decision. In this last legislative session, there was quite a lot of discussion on a planning perspective side of things about residential development and trying to do some things that would maybe provide more housing. And he brought forward a bill that would have very much opened up single family housing to more development. And it scared the heck out of a lot of neighborhoods. So there was a lot of opposition to it and it didn't pass. I understood what folks that were backing that were trying to move towards. That was like, addressing the affordable housing problem and having more places for people to live. And I think that that's a positive thing. But just opening it up at the state level and saying local control goes away completely and that every single neighborhood can have, up to 4 units on a single, what's currently a single family lot is a pretty bold step. So I could see why they were a little concerned about that. But he was willing to have the conversation. So when somebody asked him to file that, he said, we're going to file it and see where it lands. And it didn't pass. But I think that's, open to ideas and having discussions.
And that's just like what I feel like we need to get back to.
And I also think it's important to have somebody from Fort Worth. If we're being, there's a lot of cities around Fort Worth, and there's probably going to be some folks from more outlying areas and smaller communities. And I think that Fort Worth is a major city, and having representatives that are from Fort Worth, as the 817 podcast, although I know 817 goes beyond just the city of Fort Worth, I think that's really important. I mean, we are people who love this city and are here to do work to try to improve this city. And so selfishly, I would like anyone who represents us at that level, federal government and state government, to be from Fort Worth. Yeah.
And to wrap up like the whole my analysis on what Fort Worth needs from a political leader, it's Fort Worth is a purple city, and the difference between being a Fort Worth a purple city and the Fort Worth way is the Fort Worth way is we don't talk about politics because we're a red city. The transition is we do talk about the hard things. We do talk about politics. We do discuss it. We do have friction, but then we figure out what's best for the collective of the purple. That one giant leap from our nonprofit organizations, from our leadership, like getting just from we don't talk about politics and just act nice to yes, things are changing and we need to preserve this specialness that we have of being a purple city. And so we got to come to the table with tough things, even if we don't like it. I just think that's the magic that we have to have, that cosmic shift if we're going to be the Fort Worth we want to be in the next 10 years. But we got to wake up and we got to quit being scared of the legacy people. And so
I think, there's certain things that are factual that we are not admitting or accepting or even talking about, like you said, because of the fact that they're seen as being ultra partisan. And so even to have the conversation, for example, someone who is really conservative doesn't want to maybe have the conversation about systemic racism. Mm-hmm. But these are things that we have to accept are true and factual, and that changes need to happen in order to address them, and not feel like it's a finite pie that if we make these changes to address this equity piece, that we're going to be losing something from the people who have had the power.
And a lot of our reviews about the 817 podcast that are like 1 stars, 2 stars, it's like, oh, this progressive liberal podcast. But like, and I've had people text me like, because people ask me, what's your agenda with the 817 pod? And they're like, and they go, oh, you're obviously trying to push the liberal agenda I'm like, no, I feel like I have to push against stockyards. I have to push against Cowtown. I have to push against that because we need to pull back to the middle of what Fort Worth is. And that's
it's
the
not
purple.
Reflective of the entire community.
And I sound even more progressive and liberal because I need to pull our thoughts and perspectives back to where it should be. And if we got there, I would start talking about
both
the
sides.
the centered level of Fort Worth. And so like that is one of the I don't mind, being seen
called
as,
names.
Yeah, not at all. And I did, I did vote for Bernie Sanders, when it was Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders left. But, at the end of the day, that was a good little synopsis. Let's go ahead and move into wins and losses. And what is your loss?
I know that you have a win today that is my loss is a little bit reflective on. So my loss is that there is no public transportation for folks to go to Arlington today to celebrate a big parade that happened here on Friday. There was a lot of discussion, and I was actually so surprised at the number of people who are not really immersed in the transit space who brought this topic up and said, "Hey, Arlington, wouldn't it be great if you didn't have to have a huge traffic jam for people to come and observe a loop around the stadium by the folks that won a baseball championship recently?"
Yeah, and so I'm going to just go ahead and start with my win because that would have been a good... The World Series, right? We won the World Series, Texas Rangers, first one in history, and, they say 300, 400,000 people out there. So think of the chaos.
Yeah, I know a few people that got there very early. I saw a friend tweet that she was there 3 hours early. She was sitting in a chair. So she obviously got up early to get there. And then I heard people this morning saying that traffic was backed up all the way into Fort Worth early early in the day. So if everybody has to drive in cars, that's what's going to happen when that many people try to converge on a place.
Yeah.
So let's learn a lesson and not have this happen when the soccer stuff
World
comes.
Cup shows up.
Yes.
So my loss, so I'll finish with my loss and then you give it a win. My loss is actually something, it's just more America, federal stuff, but my loss is how people walk around and act like the American economy is not doing well. And I am not a Biden guy. I'm not hey, Biden's the greatest guy ever. He's my candidate. But this idea, his approval ratings are so low for, what has he done? And so one of those things is that the U.S. economy is doing great. Real U.S. GDP growth came in at 4.9% annual rate in the third quarter, which is faster than China's official rate, which they also fib a lot of their statistics anyways. The unemployment rate continues to hover near record lows, 3.8. The prime age employment rate is near record highs at almost 81%. Inflation has come way down and is now around 3.7%. All right, the median wage growth is outpacing inflation, and we just saw a new survey data showing that Americans have gotten wealthier. The median wealth in America has jumped 30+%. Listen, I just think that's a shame that we're not actually we're just doomsday people and we act like America's falling off the cliff and we're all blaming it because we have an old non-relatable kind of stuttering president. And I just think we're actually
doing better.
There's actually a lot. We're doing stuff. So my loss is that we actually don't see how impressive how we transitioned out of the pandemic compared to other countries and where we are today.
So my win is an event I attended yesterday. Fort Worth officials cheer city's first tree preservation plan at an Arbor Day celebration. So yesterday there was an event at Bunch Park on the east side. And, the agenda that I received said there was going to be a tree planting at 9 a.m. and then they were going to have all of the electeds speaking and the gold shovels and all this was going to happen at 11. And so I jokingly said to somebody, what are we doing? A 2-hour tree planting? Are we reforesting the park? And then I had to take those words back because literally they planted 30 trees in 2 hours and they were reforesting that park. They had students from Dunbar High School out there planting trees for a couple of hours, along with some folks that have been working really hard on this tree preservation ordinance. So Texas Arbor Day is held on the first Friday in November each year, and they talk about the importance of trees. And like I said, they planted 30 trees that morning by Dunbar High School students. Council member Gina Bivens was there and Michael Crane as well. And Richard Zavala, who heads up the Parks Department, was there. And the council members are expected to get their hands on the draft Fort Worth first urban forestry master plan by the end of the year. And I helped read some drafts of it and answer some questions and give some input along with other stakeholders. It harkens back to the city of Fort Worth didn't have a tree preservation ordinance or a tree planting requirement for development back in the early 90s. And everybody thought that if they implemented these requirements that it was going to stop all development, which all the smaller cities around us had them. And so it didn't. But I think this does point to we still need some improvements, but this is a step in the right direction. So we're going to take this as a win that we actually have this first urban forestry master plan.
I love it. That's awesome. Thank you guys for listening to the 817 podcast. You guys have been a great group. Thank you for listening all the way through the end. We'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. You can find us on Instagram if you have opinions about what you think is going to happen after Kate Granger. Like we said, we got to December 11th, so we'll be tracking it along the way. And thank you for listening to the pod.
Thanks, everybody.
Control your life, control your life. Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us like double tap.